You know, Donald Trump has now said that actually the tariff on Chinese goods is at 145%. The reason we're not going to get much of a response from the Chinese government to this is that at this point it doesn't matter. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. Just in the last few moments, the BBC has confirmed that US tariffs against China add up to 145%. Our next story is from the United States of America. The White House is making a stunning U-turn. President Donald Trump is having a change of heart. Last week he roared about crushing China with tariffs. The headline said it was about strength, about standing up to foreign exploitation, about restoring American pride. But behind the slogans and photo ops, a very different reality was unfolding. One defined not by victory but by loss, factories shuttered, orders canceled, paychecks erased, and the people who believed they were being protected were the first ones left behind. This is the story they do not want you to hear. How trade wars pitched as economic salvation have triggered a wave of job losses and financial pain across the very communities they promised to defend. Before we continue, hit that like button to help us beat the YouTube algorithm and to show your support. It began with a promise: punish China, realign global trade, and bring manufacturing jobs home. But the reality was a tidal wave of tariffs imposed not just on adversaries, but on allies, trading partners, and supply chains the US economy could not function without. And the consequences were swift. By the time the second wave of tariffs hit in early 2025, nearly half of all layoffs in the US were traced back to companies buckling under the weight of rising costs. Tariffs of 145% on Chinese imports sent shockwaves through industries from retail to manufacturing. And it was not just China. Duties were slapped on goods from Europe, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and South Korea. The global economy responded with retaliation, and suddenly the US found itself isolated, encircled, and economically exposed. Companies began pulling guidance. General Motors, Ford, American Eagle, and dozens of major employers issued warnings. They were cutting forecasts, halting expansion, and in many cases laying off workers just to stay afloat. Entire cities were affected. In Columbus, Indiana, a manufacturing hub once seen as a success story, foreign orders dried up. Employers cut hours, layoffs surged. Factories that had operated for decades started posting permanently closed signs. And the people who were told tariffs would save them were left without jobs, health insurance, or a future. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button to show your support to the channel. The job losses did not come in isolation. They triggered a chain reaction. Families began missing mortgage payments. Local tax revenue plunged. School budgets were cut. Food banks were overwhelmed. Economists warned that the pain was spreading faster than the relief. And yet, the administration doubled down. They called the tariffs necessary leverage. They insisted the long-term benefits would outweigh the short-term sacrifices. But the sacrifices were not being made in Washington boardrooms or on Capitol Hill. They were being made in warehouse break rooms, union halls, and small-town diners, the very places that had handed Trump his electoral victories. In Iowa, John Deere announced a move that sent shockwaves through the Midwest, shifting more production to Mexico despite laying off thousands in the US over the previous year. The backlash was immediate. Trump threatened a 200% tariff on foreign-built equipment, but Deere held firm and the layoffs continued. In Michigan, steelworkers faced a cruel twist. Tariffs on foreign steel made raw materials more expensive. Domestic producers hiked prices, construction slowed, and jobs vanished. What was pitched as protection for US steel ended up driving demand down across the board. In Texas, furniture plants closed after import duties on wood and components made their products too expensive to compete globally. In Georgia, appliance manufacturers scaled back, and across California, the once booming solar panel industry collapsed under the weight of raw material costs. Each headline told a local story, but together they painted a national tragedy, and it was not just manufacturing. Farmers were hit harder than anyone. Export tariffs crushed demand for US soybeans, pork, corn, and dairy. China turned to Brazil. Mexico turned to Argentina. The United States, once the world's breadbasket, had become the world's backup plan. Farmers liquidated herds. Grain rotted in storage. Equipment auctions multiplied. And as prices fell and input costs rose, even multi-generation farms began to disappear. Analysts predicted that by the end of 2025, farm income would drop by more than $40 billion. It was not just unsustainable, it was catastrophic. Meanwhile, foreign companies adapted. Chinese manufacturers shifted production to Vietnam. European firms rerouted exports through the Middle East. South Korean electronics companies moved their operations to Mexico. The global economy moved around the US, not through it. But inside the US, the pain was unavoidable. A report from the Yale Budget Lab found that the revised April tariffs would cut GDP growth by nearly 1% and cost up to 700,000 jobs over 2 years. The Tax Foundation estimated household income losses in the thousands. The Penn-Wharton budget model projected negative wage impacts for lower-income earners and long-term stagnation for manufacturing regions. And yet, the rhetoric remained the same: winning. Only no one could point to what had been won. The markets fluctuated wildly. Investors were spooked by uncertainty. Supply chains broke down. Small businesses faced new import fees they could not afford. Consumers paid more for food, appliances, and vehicles. In a single week in May, the price of consumer electronics rose by 9%. New car prices increased by over $2,000 due to supply costs. Grocery bills jumped across the board. For working-class families already battling inflation, this was not protectionism, it was punishment. And the irony was impossible to ignore. The same administration claiming to champion the working class was presiding over the most aggressive economic contraction in modern history, one entirely self-inflicted. Even allies abroad began distancing themselves. Canada warned that US protectionism was destabilizing North American trade. Ireland projected between 50,000 and 75,000 job losses in worst-case scenarios. Germany, Mexico, and Japan filed formal WTO challenges, and the World Bank downgraded global growth forecasts. Inside the US, governors from both parties began issuing statements. In Ohio, the Republican governor begged the administration to pause steel tariffs. In Illinois, the Democratic governor accused Washington of economic sabotage. In Pennsylvania, manufacturing associations warned that permanent damage had already been done. The backlash reached Washington. Congressional leaders, including some Republicans, demanded hearings. Economists were brought in to testify. Workers who had lost jobs told their stories under oath, and for the first time in years, the narrative began to shift. This was not strategic, this was reckless. This was not strength, it was desperation, and the evidence was overwhelming. In a PBS analysis, job market strength in early 2025 was exposed as a mirage, driven by temporary hiring, government stimulus, and debt-fueled spending. As tariffs took full effect, the real numbers began to show. Employment softened, wages stagnated, new investments slowed. Meanwhile, Trump held rallies promising to impose even more tariffs on Vietnam, on the Philippines, on India. Each announcement sent new shockwaves through industries already on the brink. Investors described it as chaos. One Bloomberg analyst compared the tariff strategy to setting fire to your own house to prove you own it. In China, the response was clinical. Beijing cut tariffs on Brazilian soy and European steel. It increased subsidies to domestic exporters. It moved aggressively to sign new bilateral trade deals, isolating the United States from global flows of capital and commodities. And in every room where deals were made, one question lingered. Is the United States still a reliable trading partner? Or has it become the world's most unpredictable risk? Even Trump's core base began to fracture. In Wisconsin, laid-off plant workers confronted campaign volunteers. In Kentucky, farmers demanded answers at town halls. In Arizona, truckers pointed to tariffs as the reason their routes were being canceled. The betrayal was not theoretical. It was on their pay stubs, their empty factories, their foreclosure letters. And yet, the message from the top never changed. Trust the plan. But the plan was broken. And so was the promise. Because what trade wars reveal is not just the cost of confrontation. They reveal the fragility of systems built on illusion. The illusion that punishment is policy, that strength is measured in slogans, that tariffs are weapons and not wounds. What happens next? That depends on how long the pain is allowed to spread. The administration could roll back tariffs, negotiate trade pacts, rebuild trust with allies, invest in domestic innovation instead of economic walls, or it could double down. If it does, the damage will only deepen, because trade wars do not end with victory, they end with exhaustion. And the bill is always paid by the worker.